Imagine Europe losing its industrial edge while China and the US dominate the future of technology. How can we ensure Europe remains competitive in the global innovation race? Welcome to this podcast where we explore global risks in the AI era. We interviewed Michiel Scheffer, President of the Board of the European Innovation Council, to learn about Europe's €10 billion plan to foster deep tech innovation. I'm Philippe, co-founder of the INGAGE Institute. We help insurers, insuretechs, and risk managers with visionary content marketing and thought-provoking training to engage clients and empower employees. Do you struggle to capture the knowledge of your experts? Contact us. Now join me as we delve deeper into today's topic together. Note that Michiel Scheffer does not necessarily represent the views of the European Commission.
Today on the show, I have the great pleasure to welcome Michiel Scheffer, President of the Board of the European Innovation Council. Hi, Michiel. How are you doing?
Good evening. Nice to meet you.
Likewise. So I'd like to jump in it right away. With my understanding, basically, you spend a lot of money.
I'm often called the guy of 10 billion euros. That's a bit a strict statement because I don't evaluate any individual proposal. I'm advising with my board of 20 members on how to prioritize. I also look into the system sometimes, sampling, reading proposals sometimes, but I don't evaluate them, assisting the juries, but I don't judge them. I also speak to a lot of recipients. So I want to know what the real experience, what the innovator's journey is.
You speak about innovation, and that's the core of what you do for the European Union. Why is innovation important, actually?
It's important. So we basically only fund deep tech to be defined. So deep tech. So basically technologies, innovations that are rooted in fundamental research. And the problem of Europe compared to the US and China is that we are very good in research still, but we are not so good in turning research and innovation. And we are not so good in turning innovation in leading companies. And the EIC has been designed to cover that gap, to foster that more startups come out of research and that those startups are able to scale.
So startups in deep tech. What is exactly deep tech?
Well, deep tech is defined as requiring very fundamental knowledge of phenomena. So, for example, we have Anne Lillier, Nobel Prize winner, has also a deep tech company where she used these light technologies she has found out to use in lasers. And that's an example. Another example is Accelera, a company that basically wants to make a better chip than NVIDIA for AI. Or we have companies understanding fundamentally how cancer works, and they basically improve the imaging techniques of it, identifying in the intestines, breasts, lungs. So those are examples. We have a lot of energy storage, but not being lithium batteries, so alternatives to lithium batteries. So those are examples of deep tech. What is also a way of defining them is if you are in deep tech, you're going to have a lot of nightmares. So it will take 3 to 5, 6 years before you get market traction, maybe 10 years before you have a reasonable EBITDA. Don't even think of profits. So you're faced with a long period of investments, nightmares, firing people, recruiting people, not finding the right ones. So it's not an easy road you're on, and any help you can get is welcome.
But that's the life of any entrepreneur, actually. We've been through that ourselves. Any startup goes through that, the 3, 4, 5 years of struggling and figuring out market fit and all these things.
Yeah, but if you start as a hairdresser or a pâtisserie confiserie, I hope that you have a reasonable EBITDA after a year, unless you have a problem. A restaurant is the same. I mean, the first year should be more or less break even. And I was a consultant, for example. It took me 2 years to be profitable, but not 7.
You're 10 billion euros. How much time do you have to spend them?
We got that budget for a 7-year period, 2019, 2027. And we do it partly in grants for very initial ideas, and we do it partly in equity in companies that have a reasonable basis. So they exist already 5 years. They have a certain proof of concept or a pilot that works, and they have to scale.
So you could be shareholders of a company.
So through a Luxembourg instrument, we are shareholders of 255 companies.
And how do you compare to the US, of course, and to China? Are you big?
Well, we're far bigger than the American because there's no public VC in the US providing this kind of money. In the US, we compare ourselves with big private investors like Sequoia, but public, there's none. In China, there are a lot of public funding of innovation and of companies. It is not at all transparent. And probably the Chinese are bigger, but they also move faster to large-scale industrialization.
But if I speak about 10 billion euros for 7 years, let's say it's a billion per year. That's not very much. That's nothing, actually.
No, we are a big player within Europe, but there are other big players. BPI France is a big one. By far, let's say the biggest public bank in Europe devoted to innovation. The Finns have one. The Dutch have InvestNL, which is, I think, 3 billion euros. So there are regional banks. I was, as a regional politician, the architect of a regional development bank of 1.2 billion in total, but for 2 million people. So there are several other players, and we work very closely with them, being public or sectoral or private. So it's both big and small. And we are a major investor in Europe, but we only invest in 0.02% of high-tech companies.
And then you say you have these partners maybe on the national levels or private banks that you can work with.
No, so there are two things that happen in countries with well-developed regional banks or national banks, or let's say, and public banks. There are two ways we work with. One is they advise their participants to apply for us because we have often bigger tickets. We can go up to 15 million euros until next year. And from next year onwards, we also have a 30 million ticket. So we can go bigger than they do. And they also feel that when they have big challenges with big potential equity, they rather do it in Europe because we have a better comparison. We have a bigger deal flow than the national ones. They feel more assured. What often happens with BPI or InvestNL or several others is that they often co-invest when we invest as well. They stay on board or they come on board with us. And the BPI France is by far the biggest co-investor with us.
So you speak about investing, but when we created a startup, we were looking to different sources of financing. And then I have a friend who went through your process and she said, oh my God, you have to get consultants and it takes forever. Is it still the case?
Well, it doesn't take forever because it's roughly 5 months between the application date and the decision. The due diligence can be very fast, depending on how well prepared the company is. So that's for the investment parts. In the accelerator, when we invest, we give grant and equity. So you first go for a grant, and then if you're ready to get for equity, then you apply for equity, and the EIB does a due diligence. So it is, let's say, if one wants to go fast and is well prepared, it can go quite fast. If they're a bit new to it, I would say, well, it needs more time to adjust and to go back and forth to get an application done.
And I've seen there was a lot of consulting companies helping because it seemed to me, and I might be wrong, it was quite a complex system. You need to write it, to set it up. So there was a whole ecosystem developed around writing business plans to apply. Is it still the case?
Well, to be very clear, the application process in terms of documentation is not different than what you have to do for a VC. So first you come with a good PowerPoint and a pitch. So we ask a video pitch of a number of minutes, 3, I think. So it's quite short, and we ask for 16 slides. So which one are you combining? What are the key messages? So if your pitch has gone through and the PowerPoint as well, then you go for a full proposal. That's a 40-pager. I've been a grant writer myself. To be concise and condensed and have the essential is not a simple thing, especially our applicants do it often for the first time and hopefully also for the last time. So they're not trained in it. I mean, I wrote 50 proposals. So I know, but I was a consultant. So I know roughly the do's and don'ts. Here you have companies, you have people for which it's essential. It's a matter of life to be funded or not. Mm-hmm. And they take a consultant because they are not sure that they have the skills to do it themselves. However,
it's actually not such a cumbersome process from what you're saying.
Yeah, but it's a bit like in the Bourgeois Gentilhomme. I mean, to have a good understanding of prose or poetry is not so simple. And it's also, say, you always need a good friend or someone who reads your proposal and also sees it. Is it clear? Is it understandable? Is it obvious? Do you miss out things or do you overemphasize something which is a minor point? A good proposal is never written alone, but 50% of the proposals we fund have not been supported by consultants.
Okay.
That's what the entrepreneur knows, and the team knows. And I know very well an entrepreneur from Nord-Pas-de-Calais, and he said, well, it's an essential process to do with the team because writing a business plan is also clearing where are we going all together? And what is our objective? Who does what? What do we need for it? What is the funding required? So it's also a very common sense process. Because there's nothing esoteric in the application process. It's relatively logical things.
And it's for deep tech, you said. So if someone comes to you and say, hey, I want to create the new Facebook or something like that, they would not be qualified for that. It should be like research in AI or things like this rather.
As a general principle, yes. If someone comes again with Facebook, we say, well, it already exists. We don't fund it. If you want to compete with the Michelin guide, it's the same. So it requires something which is really technologically novel and disrupt a market.
Yeah. Do we have a Silicon Valley in Europe?
No, we don't have a Silicon Valley. We have a totally different structure. We have, let's say, a continent with a sprawl of technology development. So it really goes from Toulouse to Hamburg and from Lisbon to Zagreb. So we have much more sprawl, and it's also much more multidisciplinary. Yeah? While Silicon Valley is really ICT, we have hubs where you have ICT, but also a lot of industrial engineering skills, medical skills. So we are much more multidisciplinary in our hubs. The place that looks most like Silicon Valley, because it's the highest concentration of companies, is the southwest of Paris, the area called Saclay. It's probably the highest concentration. It's the one which is in the CEA. That's a big concentration, the Centre d'Énergie Atomique, and the university is also an important player. But in Delft, Netherlands, 14 companies on 1 square kilometer. That's also a concentration. Lund is a concentration. Galway is a concentration. München has about 18 beneficiaries for a smaller scale city than Paris. Copenhagen is important. Novo Nordisk as a player is there quite stimulating. Barcelona is important. Grenoble in France is also an important city in terms of number of companies we fund.
So there's not one single place where you would say that's really a concentration of all the innovation, but it's disseminated around the EU.
Yeah. So yes, indeed, the Ile-de-France is the region with the biggest number of beneficiaries or laureates.
Paris,
it is only 6%, I think, of the whole portfolio. While in the US, Silicon Valley would be substantially higher than 6%, and there's nothing in Nebraska.
But doesn't it create more synergies when everybody's one place? You know, they have all these people, you go walk down the street or drive down the street and meet everybody, and it could be like burgeoning faster.
Yeah, but that's not the geography we have as Europe. We don't have a concentrated structure because we have a different history than the US has.
So what about unicorns? How well are we performing on that area compared to the others like US, China, India?
No, we measure the unicorn potential. So we measure the valuation of the companies in the portfolio. It's all very early. So the oldest investments are 4 years old. We estimate based on valuation that we have on the 635 companies in the grant stage, 255 in the equity stage. Of those, we have somewhere between 10 and 15 potential unicorns.
And how does that compare, for example, with the same stats for a US, for example, just to get an idea?
Oh, the US has more unicorns, but that's the only figure you can compare because they don't have an accelerator. And so they're on a unicorn base slightly high. However, they will also count companies as unicorns that we don't call deep tech.
When I listen to you, it seems that we're actually quite well positioned.
No, we have two major challenges. One is that, let's say, we have provided a financial market or a new financial asset class up to 30 million euro investment. And we basically have a smaller one. So the small investments are around 6 million euros, and we have a category where we are around 15 million, and we will have a new one when we can go up to 30 billion. The big difference between us and the US and China is there is still a lack in the public and the private market in very big tickets, to the 300 million and higher.
We first start creating the companies in Europe, and when it's really above the 30 million, we go across the Atlantic.
Then let's be precise on this. The risk we have is that companies get on up to the 30 million level, and then either they're taken over by US investors, but the company stays in Europe, or they quote themselves on NASDAQ in New York. So they create an American holding, but the company stays here. So let's not overemphasize it. Yes, there is a drain to the US, But you don't get, if you move to the US, you don't get an H-1B visa or a J-2 visa for 300 people, and that's almost impossible. So you often keep, let's say, the R&D activity here, and that's for us a condition. And so basically, if a company in our portfolio is acquired, the patent portfolio and the R&D department must stay here. We have a golden share facility to enable that.
What do you mean with that?
That means that in some instances, we remain on as a shareholder. We cannot be sold out. And we stay there basically to assuring that the company keeps the bulk of its activities in Europe.
How are you going to change this if you do want to? That companies can go up to the 300 million. They can find this in Europe.
Well, there's two important things to do. One is we have started a month ago the so-called Trusted Investor Network. So basically, everyone who's investing in our 250 companies as of yet become member of the Trusted Investor Network. And that's also to give them a view in our portfolio and to seduce them or to give them the right information to be able to invest in more companies than we do. It's also to prepare for an exit market. And they say, okay, this is an interesting company. We pay out all the other investors and we go on as the majority investors, and we have found funds for doing that. So that's one important direction. The second important direction is, take the words of Macron of his Sorbonne speech in April. The second important challenge is to get institutional investors either investing in a company by company basis or by opening up our fund, and investors, institutional investors, can become either shareholders or bondholders of our fund and, let's say, indirectly invest. So that's the two strategies we are following. And I see already a potential traction of institutional investors doing it. Because let's not forget, the biggest drain we have, and Macron said that in his speech, is that Europeans invest a year 600 billion euros in the American economy and not in the European economy.
You want to reshift, you want to point it to Europe instead of the US.
So if we want to pay out the pensions in 10 years' time, we rather do that by profits made in Europe and not in the US.
Yeah, but the energy actually is much more expensive in Europe than in the US. This puts European companies at a disadvantage.
Yeah, but as long as we are fossil-based, we have to import our energy, and we are highly dependent on other people setting the prices. But if we move further, and that's one of the objectives of the IC, if we move further in promoting sustainable energies, sun, wind, tide, bio-based, we get less dependent. So one of the rushes we have to do is to increase rapidly our energetic autonomy, and it's becoming less of an issue. And the other thing we also have to cover is, if we are importing less oil for energy, we also have to import less oil for materials. So we have to make materials based on our resources, and we still have a vibrant agricultural potential and also potential for making materials and energy out of agricultural produce. So there is a strategy that is engaged and further possible that makes us far less depending on the US. That's one of the reasons of Trump's ire, is there is a negative trade balance for the US with us. They buy more from us than we from them. And
he wants to change that.
He wants to change that. Yeah, but the problem is that we buy bulk stuff from the US and they buy Louis Vuitton bags and Chanel perfume. So we sell relatively high value and also symbolic value products. They provide us with bulk.
We hear a lot about between Europe and the US. They say the US innovates and Europe regulates. Now, hey, it's cool that we protect our privacy, but it seems that the regulation that is coming, the Digital Markets Act, the AI Act, we are based in Zurich now, and we saw a lot of entrepreneurs who were working in crypto saying, hey, now that these regulations, they were thinking about moving to other jurisdiction, could be maybe Asia or whatever. What do you say to people that Europe is regulating too much?
There's a good reason why we have regulation, because we want to protect the privacy of people, and we don't want consequences like being locked out of insurance because your health data gets in a place where you don't want to. So we have a tradition of protecting. The US does not protect its citizens against monopoly use, and it shows. There's a very fundamental difference in the view of what the rule of law means, and that is the reason why we have protection. We also have protection because we dedicate more effort to the protection of workers' safety, the quality of affluence. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why we think that's important, and as a board, we strongly support that. But let's not forget, regulation is only a problem for 10-15% of companies. Most of them are free to do what they want. And of course, the crypto is complaining a lot. Well, so be it.
AI companies too. I mean, and that's probably the future of the world now, AI. So they're also complaining about that. We get for ChatGPT, the latest versions, they are coming in the US and much later to Europe. So aren't we lagging behind because of regulation?
Yeah, but what progress is ChatGPT giving us? What is the impact of ChatGPT on productivity, for example? Does it reduce our energy use? Does it help us in improving agriculture? Does it help us in extending life expectation? I'm not sure on all those things. And what I see in our portfolio, we have mainly, also because of the funding available, most of the AI we fund is in medical, the visualization of colorectal cancer, the visualization of breast cancer, the visualization of lung cancer, and a dozen of those kinds. So very niche-focused things. Here, of course, there are privacy considerations, but basically, if you use scans of a person, the objective is to improve the medical treatment of that person. But we don't want that all these databases of scans are bought by an American multinational that uses it for a totally different reason. The other thing where we see a lot of AI is, for example, I met a number of companies in Germany, they use AI to understand the vibrations in machines and to predict when maintenance has to be done. That is totally regulation-free. A machine doesn't have a privacy. So there's a lot of AI possible. Regulation doesn't play a role.
The fact that there is a certain lag in AI spreading to Europe from the US, you think it's not an issue for companies? I mean, it doesn't play a role.
Well, what is important is that AI is useful if it helps to increase productivity. And we have a big challenge because we have a far more aging population than China. In the next 30 years, afterwards it will change. But we certainly have a much more aging population than the US. So we have a huge productivity issue. So indeed, it's even a favor for Europe if we are able to replace stupid work by AI. And then people can do more intelligent work, or let's say work requiring a high touch or a cultural feel, which is not easily replaced by AI. So yes, there is a challenge, and we really have to increase productivity. Draghi is quite clear in his report on that. And one of the crucial sectors where the productivity has to increase is in healthcare. Because healthcare is the most, let's say, fast-growing sector in Europe because of aging, and that's all to be covered by taxpayers' money or by other public systems. And we cannot go on increasing the healthcare costs. So we have to increase productivity there. And there AI may help. But if AI is only slurping energy but not providing any substantial societal improvement, I wonder if it's more, let's say, contributing to bubbles than to structural GDP growth.
And for the AI, because there are different types of AI. There's a famous AGI. Before we thought it would not happen. Now it's pretty much around the corner. There's the artificial superintelligence that goes way beyond AGI, way beyond any human capability, where it's a game over for the ones who don't have it. What's your view on AGI and ASI between the two?
Well, for me, I was trained as a geographer. And when I did my studies in the 1980s, I learned multivariate statistics and we learned gravity models to plan shopping malls. The problem at the time was that the models were there, but the computers were not there to do it in a swift manner. A simple gravity calculation for finding where a supermarket would be installed basically took the whole lunch hour to calculate. And after lunch hour, we had a very simple calculation back. Just to say that basically what AI does is to enable calculation that was not possible in a simple SPSS program. But what is also important is you have to understand the fundamentals behind. So I was recently in Germany, the Germans being very thorough said, well, AI is worthwhile if you understand the fundamental causalities. If you don't understand the causalities, you only get correlations between what is the most frequent outcome if you have a set of things, but it doesn't explain you to understand patterns. And so it's also interesting is what is AI really doing? Is it really giving a deeper understanding? Is it what we see also a lot, AI being used as a research tool to basically cut down an infinite range of scenarios to the 5 more likable ones. And the 5 more likable ones you take to study in depth, okay, what is happening and what is of the 5 the best one to use? For example, we also had a discussion about could AI have helped in the Valencia disaster? The problem is that AI works on relatively stable data sets. Because if you have suddenly, let's say, a crash or an irregularity that's not easily predicted.
You don't see this as a main game changer for the world? When I listen to you, it seems that AI, well, it's good. It's a cool tool, but it doesn't seem that it's going to change our society. It's possible not to replace white-collar jobs. Before, it was robots replacing strength in the factories. Now with AI, you can do more and more complex work, replacing even doctors, copywriters, a whole set of jobs, enhancing them first, but then being able to do their work, even as just as AGI, not speaking about a super intelligent AI later, where basically there wouldn't be a need really for humans to work.
Where there's a real point, it is very likely that AI will replace a lot of mid-skilled white-collar work. So as long as you are with texts or figures, so you stay in the computer, AI can do a lot. Well, once AI meets the physical world or the chemical world, it's quite different because you require another understanding. So it's very likely that I could replace the diagnosis process of a doctor. But does it replace the psychological help of a doctor? The comforting feeling or the injection needle?
You know, I was talking about this with a friend of mine,
Yeah.
and she said, hey, I just broke up with my boyfriend.
Yeah.
And she was using AI to talk about it with it already now.
With who? Okay.
So she was using ChatGPT. She didn't give me the details, but basically she was using this as a shrink. And I've heard quite a few other people going there. It seems some people might even get it as their friends, as the confidant that you might not have in a fast society like ours. And in France, there was a politician from the Communist Party at the last presidential elections, and he wanted to have a universal income. Is this going to happen?
I've been in my political party member of a committee thinking of a universal income in 1992. So that's already 22 years ago. We still don't have it. And yes, of course, I mean, it's a classic discussion. Every time we talk about mechanization, robotization, the discussion of a basic income or universal income comes up. The problem is also that I like your example of the chatting AI service, but I remember also having spoken last year to 2 women who were developing pornographic and erotic literature for women.
Yeah.
But it didn't work.
Why not?
Because 95% of erotics and pornographic literature and imaging is written for men. So it didn't work.
Okay.
So the question they asked for us was, would it be possible to develop a bias corrector where basically you have to throw out the majority to keep the minority that you need one? There's so much pornography on Earth that 5% is also a relatively big database. The problem with AI, it is producing, let's say, majority statements. So if you are a lesbian woman of let's say, a non-European background in Europe, the average American male stuff will not work. The problem is we have in general to form a good set of services for people who are not in the average. I think the American model is very much driven to large groups of averages.
Speaking about people who are not in the average, or very different, what do you think about Elon Musk?
Yeah, but Elon Musk is a double guy. I mean, he's himself an exception, must be, because there are few people with his wealth. But he is somehow targeting relatively large groups. Otherwise, Trump would not have won. I mean, he must have been able to reach out to relatively large millions of people, not thousands of people. And that's where Europe's fragmentation is an advantage, because the risk is too big that Americans come with products. We live in a world of Bourdieu, la distinction. So we want to be different, distinguish ourselves by having a wine taste that is, let's say, particular. So we have a whole culture in Europe of, let's say, trying to be on our own, and there's an increasing culture in Europe of regionalism, people being proud of being from Alsace or Brittany or being back. And that diverging trends are stronger, also making it more difficult to use those advanced techniques because they need a big mass of users.
Which technologies will transform companies and the insurance in the next 5 years, according to you?
Well, one thing where maybe AI may work is on the insurance business, to have a better view of risks. I'm Dutch, so I'm from a part of the world which is 3 meters below sea level. My daughter was born 6 meters below sea level. There, the insuring of houses and understanding risks and mitigating them is an important effort, which for insurers and for banks will be important to decide whether a real estate is bankable, mortgageable or not. So I think that is a quite important thing. What is also important is to have a better understanding of complex systems like soils.
Yeah.
Because we have been disturbing our soils with PFAS, plastics, and so on, and we have to decontaminate that. We have depleted the organic compound level of soil, so a lot of soils in Europe are no longer fertile in 20 or 30 years' time. So that's also a big challenge we have to address. If we want to move to the biopolymers, we will have to design new polymers. That's also where AI and quantum technology can be important. And that's where Europe is quite strong, is the understanding of the cellular structure of humans, and also to have a better understanding of the dynamics between our cells and interventions, immunology. So that's quite interesting, because currently a lot of our medical companies are taken over by American companies. But on the other hand, it can very well be that in 20 years' time, we have no pharma anymore, because we will have, at the hospital level, an immunology treatment which is designed for each individual, partly based on AI, but also based on the original data of the person. So that's also another business model where hospitals will be the leaders in healthcare and no longer the big pharma companies. I always feel, because I have two daughters in their 20s, we are doing the right things. I'm not sure we do enough of it. So if we think that we fundamentally have to change the way we live by decarbonizing, I'm not sure we are going fast enough to avoid a very complex and unpredictable and cruel climate change.
So what do you tell your daughters? They look at you. I mean, you were a politician, awarded politician, and they say, hey, Dad, what are you doing? You and your generation are not moving enough. You're spotting a future. What's your fault?
The problem is that that's a political one. We are not, those who are convinced that there is an issue with climate, with scarcity of materials and scarcity of food, are not the majority voice. The majority of people think there's no problem, or refuse to think there's a problem, or reject it. So the problem is we either have not been convincing enough, or we have not been able to mobilize enough.
So, Michiel, the way I understand it, it's not, from what I saw from statistics, I think in France was 57% of people believed in it. But it seemed that while they understood there was this problem, they did not like the solutions as societies. So it's not actually the only people saying, no, there's no climate change. But it's more people saying, there is climate change, but you politicians don't bring any solutions that we can feel comfortable with.
It's also because it is not easy. I happen to have I happen to own a house in the middle of France, and without a car, you're nowhere. And even with an electric car, it's the number of places where you can refuel is extremely limited. So you really have to have a good place at home. So in those rural areas, a change is quite impacting. But also in the same, it's not far from Echassières, where a lithium mine is being planned.
Where is that? So which part of France is it?
It's l'Allier, l'Auvergne.
L'Allier. Okay, beautiful.
So there's a lithium mine to be considered in an area which is depopulated.
Yes.
So it will bring 3,000 jobs. The schools will reopen because the families will come, the supermarkets will come, there will be a railway. And if you come close to Echassières, there's a whole bunch of panels everywhere. Don't open the mine. Leave us alone.
And that brings pollution too.
But at the same time, these regions have been complaining there's no pub, no cafe, nor village anymore. No, because everyone's leaving. So there's also a lack of real debate of who do we want to be? Do we want to be...
Do you think people have a problem? They want both. They want the income, the good life, and not the pollution.
Yeah.
So they don't know what they want, or they are not responsible enough.
No, basically the big problem is called negative overspill. They want the nice thing themselves and the negative consequences for the others.
Okay.
Which is now the case. I mean, we have petrol from Nigeria, and we don't have any petrol leaks in our gardens, but in Nigeria they have them.
If you don't see it, that's okay.
Yeah. So we have been used to, since the closure of the coal mines, we have been used to basically that the shit of our behavior is somewhere else.
Okay. Do you think people are ready to listen to that and accept to take consequences?
I think it's important to organize a debate, but then you need to be able to organize those debates. I just have added, how many people have I spoken to this year? Well, I've spoken to 15,000 people, which is quite a big sum. but I still have 448 million people to go. In Europe alone. The problem of really engaging, we have not organized ourselves to really engage well with people.
But isn't that the point of democracy? I mean, in Switzerland, for example, they have direct democracy. Yeah. In the EU, it's very often criticized. There's this kind of EU elite, some say. They decide and we don't know where it comes from and they don't understand. We're not involved as the common people.
Yeah.
Hey, but what do we do?
But here there's nothing, for example, the average civil servant of the European Commission has a travel budget of €1,000
per year.
Per year.
Okay.
So on one hand, we have impulses. We have to go more to speak with population. Yeah, but we can do 3 trips a year. On the other hand, the politicians say, we don't want Europe to show off to be too wealthy. So then we don't want all these civil servants traveling around because that will give a bad image.
Is that the reason why you talk to us now then?
I take almost all invitation that fits in my agenda because I think it's important to communicate. But still, as I said, I have still 448 million people to go. So it's a big work. Now, that's basically the problem. Public matters have not an organization that enables to have a good debate.
No.
Because in Brussels, it's not very difficult to have a good debate with insurers or banks. I have every month meetings with them. But though they are the elite as well. Yeah. So it's hard to organize and nevertheless very important. What is important is to foster a new generation of entrepreneurs.
Speaking about entrepreneurs and insurance companies, how do you think insurance companies can best work with startups? Do you have a recipe, the top 3 advice for insurance companies to do this very well?
Well, one thing I would like to say, I will deal with 2 in different stages. In some countries, pension funds are the big capital owners and possible investors. So one of the things we look at is, can pension funds be co-investors with us? And I already see that the big pension funds in the Netherlands are co-investing with InvestNL, that's the Dutch public bank. And they might also be interested in talking with us, provided we have a good instrumentation.
If you manage to get all these pension funds to basically target this more to investing in the next generation of companies, that can be a huge amount of money, basically.
If the Dutch pension funds would spend 1% of their capital in co-investing with us, we would double the fund.
Okay.
1% of the Dutch. But in other countries, France, for example, the role of pension funds is played by insurers. Because the insurers provide insurance products that look like a pension. And so you have your basic state pension, and if you want to have more than that, you put it in insurance funds and you get a return later on. In Germany, it's a bit the same system. In Scandinavia, they're close to the Dutch system, and Britain as well. So it's a matter of, let's say, so one is basically to convince investors like pension funds and like insurance funds to co-invest. The second one where I'm a bit still puzzled is that when I was starting a company, I knew that there was a kind of ratio between my own assets and what I could borrow at the bank. And so let's say if we put 10 million euros in a company, we would expect a bank to say, okay, if you have 10 million euros in equity provided by the European Commission and some large investors, we are willing to give you an overdraft of 10 million euros. But that doesn't happen.
Why not?
Yeah, because they apparently don't see enough guarantee in the fact that we have provided substantial equity. Okay. And what I also expect of banks is that we have some companies that have developed installations. And the next challenge is to get, when they have an installation sold to a client, to have the funds available to build it. When in normal infrastructure, you get a loan for covering the costs you make between the contract is signed and the machine is dispatched. And so I would expect the banks to be more proactive in doing that.
Why do you think they don't seize the opportunity?
What I fear is that a lot of banks have lost the skills of understanding those kind of investments.
Like this.
Knowledge has gone. Because one of the things we have to do as well is to have a transfer of investment from real estate to real industry. Because now a lot of real estate is the biggest recipient of investment in Europe, and it should be basically against productive. There is a French economist, Michiel Scheffer, who wrote a brilliant book, I'm currently reading it, who says, well, basically, as in 1946, we have to create, again, a specific banking system for industrial growth.
Yep. Things are moving, right? This re-industrialization of Europe and going this way, it seems that now it's again on the roadmap for a few leaders in Europe.
Yeah, but it requires First, the mentality. Recently, the president of the BPI gave a comment that France is on a reindustrialization track. I think 25,000 jobs last year, 75,000 jobs over a period, while Germany had lost 400,000 industrial jobs in the same time. And he said it's not easy. And he said also it requires specific financial tools. From 1945 up to almost the end of the 80s, we had specific industrial financing. So a whole system of bonds basically enabling to fund industrial investments. And what Aglietta says very, very well, since the 1980s, money has become neutral. It flows to the best short-term profits. It doesn't necessarily move to, let's say, long-term good investments, but not the best one in the short term. So what he says, and I hope we help doing that, is to create new asset classes where also insurers and banks are willing to invest into industrial investments with a decent return and a relatively decent guarantee.
And then there's a very big difference, because when you look at China, they really have a long-term plan where they do this kind of work, and they say, look, this is the strategy we want. We want to lead the world basically in 50 years. They have a long-term view. While in Europe, that's what we said. Where do we make the most money on the short term?
The problem is even harsher, because I think we have the long-term view, but we don't have the long-term instruments.
Okay.
And the EIC is one of them. We have 10 billion euros. That's already has its own challenges. You don't do that with 100 billion euros. So that proof first that you can do it with 10. And now we see how we could use at best if the next 10 we could get, or even doubling it to 20. So it's also a learning process. And you also see that we see increasingly with our trusted investment network, it'd be better if we can invest earlier with you. So because then we can step in with smaller tickets, we can observe, we take out the competition, while if we are late, the list is already public. And so you see that you can seduce financiers in a category, an asset class earlier than they would usually do. And that's also an experience I had at the Dutch level. So you can get multipliers of 4 to 10 if you do that well. In the EIC, we have now, last week I said we have a multiplier 4.0, and this week it was already 4.1.
So that means, for me to understand, is that if you have your 10 billions, what you want is to transform them into a 40 billion. Is that what you're saying?
Well, the explicit purpose of the fund given by political masters was to create an instrument that does not crowd out private capital, but seduce capital to come in. And the proof that it works is this multiplier that basically every week moves on one fraction of a percent. Well, that's the best proof that it works.
When do we know that you did a good job as a president of the AIC?
You have to ask my daughters in 20 years.
What are your top 3 KPIs? When you look at that, one day you'll say, I've done my job now, I can go happily and retire.
Well, the interesting thing is we are an instrument that works with KPIs. So we have a whole range of them. And that's quite unique. There are not a lot of public policies with KPIs. So one KPI is
Really?
Yeah. We have a whole range of KPIs, and they're discussed at each board meeting, and we ask a report of how they move. So one very important one is a leverage one. So the 4.1 is a very important KPI, and it has already exceeded what we thought would be reasonably expected. So we are above, but we think it still can improve. That's one thing. We also.
What is your range? Is it going to be a 10x? Or where would you say, I'm happy?
Honestly, I think that if we can move to 5, 6, that's great. But if we want to move higher, we have to develop a new asset class. And the new asset class has a name. The Commission has launched, with a strong advice from us, a new instrument called STEP. And STEP is a 30 million ticket. And with STEP, we expect, on also the basis of experience, that it should attract a factor 10.
Okay.
And the factor 10 has been reached by the best of the 251 companies we have in portfolio now. So some have proven that with 15 you could reach that. So okay, if you can reach it with 15, it might also work for 30, but there it's going to be a start criteria. Let's say we only fund 30 million if there is already in the application a promise of at least an equal figure from a private investor. The second important KPI is we see that our companies have a higher patent score. So that's also a good indicator. So we basically see that their, let's say, scientific production is at a higher level than those not funded. That's the second important indicator. The third one is they also create employment, but that's quite logic. If you put 6 million euros in a company, you can expect them to employ 60 people. So we look at it, is it creating employment? And I think the current position is close to 40,000 jobs has been created with EIC money.
That's a track record. A few weeks ago, I saw that you answered to Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, on one of her posts, saying, hey, EIC can help. What do you want proposed to her if she listens to us?
Well, the one thing where they need help is there has been a strong lobby over the last weeks to create a so-called 28 regime.
Yes.
And the 28 regime is basically a Società Europea, but then for startups. So it's basically a specific corporate system that would fit for high-tech or deep-tech startups that immediately have a European dimension. They would basically be able to operate and recruit in entire Europe on the basis of one legal status.
Does it have something like a sandbox where they can try things with less regulations?
That's the second thing which is important. There's also a strong need to have sandboxes or exceptions, so basically in AI as well, so that you can test out things without having to go through the full certification or legislation process. And the sandboxes are two kinds. One is single market oriented. You don't have to prove that your product fits in the rule of that market. And the other one is an easier licensing or building permit process. If you have a project of European significance, you get additional support that your building permit for your installation is given in 6 months instead of 2 years.
Do you include Switzerland, by the way, in that, or is that separate?
Psychologically, yes. Switzerland is in negotiations to rejoin the EIC. They would like to rejoin. We would like to have them back, but there are high political principles that have to be overcome. The negotiations are ongoing. It's quite important. We have, let's say, also a substantial amount of participations and companies outside the EU. Norway, for example, in grant and equity, and the UK in grant. Which could become again in a status that Norway still always had, and the UK also recently regained.
Michiel, I enjoy our discussion here, but we're nearing the end. What would be your wish, personally, for the next few years ahead? Is there something you say, that's what I would like to wish myself and maybe others?
Well, in my first interview to get this job, I got this question as well, and I say, I said to the commission,
Not original.
No. It's my guiding principle. So I said, you engage in something experimental and difficult. You made a lot of mistakes, but with my regional experience, I made them as well, and we all corrected them. So my first dream is we are doing something that will last for a long time. The first president, I think it's my responsibility to help to set a good basis that basically can be taken over by a next president the next day. So that my daughters can say when they're 50, that's an interesting function. My father was the first one.
That's daddy.
And I'm dead by then. The second important thing is, that's a personal thing. I think we should give a contribution to major technologies that help humanity remain a civilization. So that's basically that we are able to find a new model of living together with or without climate change.
Help humanity and live with or without climate change. Yeah. Mr. First President, it's been a great pleasure having a chat with you. Thanks for your time. I hope that your wishes here will realize.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I hope that to be heard in the European Union and also outside.
We'll see what Ursula says. Have a good one. Ciao, ciao.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please like it and subscribe to our channel. Do you struggle to capture and share the knowledge of your experts? Contact us. We'll love to hear from you.